Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another Beyond Pulse Inside Coach webinar. Delighted this morning to be joined by Mr. Jon Scheer, who is the Director of Talent Identification at the Philadelphia Union. Jon is also a USSF A licensed coach and was formerly a youth national team scout for the Federation. So brings with us a wealth of experience in the field of identifying top talent, and looking forward to delving into his world a little bit today for recommendations and advice for coaches and DOCs. So, Jon, thank you ever so much for spending your time to speak with us this morning, mate. Real pleasure to have you on the line.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. Excited to chat.
Okay, so Johnny, if you could, obviously we'll jump straight in with where I think your advice could be most powerful and impactful for members of our community. Could you speak to me a little bit in your roles with, obviously with the Philadelphia Union right now, and formerly with the national teams? What was it that you were looking for from a player to separate themselves in a game? What was it that made them special, and was there anything that you would identify and emphasize more than something else when you were going through that process?
Yeah, I mean it's wide ranging, I would say. We do have key qualities that we value and we evaluate players off of when we go to tournaments and league games and stuff like this on the weekends. So, I think a lot of times it starts with their comfort on the ball. But in addition to that, we look at physical traits and characteristics. We look at what they're doing off of the ball. Are they trying to recover it? Are they trying to win it back? We look at their psychosocial characteristics that we can tell, and a lot of times, there are little tells on the field that you can pick up, but a lot of times it's talking to the coaches and the parents and the player himself. And then for me, I would say the one I value the most would be the game understanding and decision making piece. So again, if the ball's in the far end of the field and they're right back, what are they doing? Are they switched off? Are they engaged? What are they doing off of the ball? Tells a lot about a player. So, I think we value special weapons or qualities, if you will, over maybe a stronger foundation, especially at the younger ages, because we think we can bring up some of the other areas of the player. But those are the general kind of characteristics that we think are important to look at and kind of help shape our scouting.
Fascinating. Thank you for sharing. Is there anything that sticks in your mind of an experience where you first saw a player, or a player was able to, go from a maybe to an absolutely yes based on an action? And is there anything that sticks in your mind from past experience of that?
Yes, I mean, I would say a lot of things on the field that you could kind of point to in a lot of different situations. I'll bring up maybe a situation off the field that was a first for me. We had a trialist in that I had scouted about 5 or 6 times in his own club environment, and showed a lot of different tools and potential. And then we had him in for a trial, and he did well. And the third to last day, he comes in early, goes to the equipment man, gets a ball on his own, gets changed on his own, and goes out to the field and starts knocking a ball against the wall and stuff like that. To me, when you're thinking about potential and kind of the pro mindset, for a 12-year-old, which he was at the time, was really, really fascinating to me. And that to me it kind of, again, lends the eye to the psychosocial characteristics of the boy. And he's one that's been with us for a couple of years now and has really, really progressed. So I would say each situation is obviously entirely different, each player, but sometimes it's things on the field, sometimes it's things on the ball or off the ball, but sometimes it's off the field as well.
No, that's great. You touched something there. Obviously, your world is dealing with potential versus performance, and sometimes the pitfalls of early identification or early talent identification is overemphasizing current state of performance based on maybe some favorable characteristics and a little advantage in terms of age or relative age. Could you explain a little briefly about what potential looks like to you, and perhaps help some of the coaches understand the difference between future potential and current performance?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, we are in the business of trying to think about potential, and we don't have a crystal ball, and we're not always going to get it right. But I think we can rest easy at night as a staff, knowing that when we are making decisions about players and who we're bringing in at the time, it is always trying to think about the potential of the boy. So I would say sometimes there's high performers with high potential, which is shouting talent in my opinion.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's low performers at the moment that have high potential that we still have to be mindful of, and that would be more whispering talent, as they call it. So I think trying to educate our scouts and our network and the club coaches in our market about maybe the late developer that was born in the fourth quarter of the year. Maybe they're not able to make a physical impact on the game at the moment, but they might have tools that once they do physically develop and mature, all the years that they've had to kind of battle and figure things out upstairs, that's going to ultimately help them. So, again, I think each player is different, but it's trying to get as much information as possible and try to put kind of an idea in our head about what they might look like in years to come. And sometimes for us, it's better for them to stay in the environment that they're in full time longer, as opposed to trying to add them to our academy right away. So I would say sometimes players need to be in an environment where maybe not everybody around them is at an elite level, and they have to bring others along with them. So we're really, really particular about when we add kids, and we don't want to add them too late for sure, but at the same time, we don't want to add them too early. So it's not an easy process, but it's one we're really, really detailed in and try to get as much background info as we can.
Yeah, perfect. And I think that's a nice caveat into the conversation that I'd like to have next about recommendations for the coaches that are obviously out there and on the grass with these kids day in day out, about what advice or recommendations and guidance could you offer those guys in terms of what they can do, both with somebody who's screaming talent right now that might not yet be integrated into your program, and then also with the whispering talent, as you eloquently put it. What can the masses of coaches be doing that are working with these kids on a daily basis to ensure that obviously they get the opportunity to fulfill potential and move on should they have it, whether that's evidently obvious right now or less so?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately it's about finding the platform that's right for each and every player at the stage they're in. And I think sometimes in this country at the moment we rush pushing players up just because they might be doing well in an environment where maybe that actually is their own age group is the right environment, or even bio banding and playing players down if they're not able to execute actions on the field because of where they are physically. I think sometimes it can go the opposite way, and that can be beneficial. But I think obviously, I think that the club coaches and the DOCs, the academy directors have a really good kind of insight into each and every player and what makes them tick. And I think ultimately finding again the training and game platform that will allow them to be pushed in a proper way is important. But whatever environment they're in, I think from my perspective as a scout, the players that I think come in and do well at the next level, if you'd call it, maybe at an MLS academy or a top non-MLS DA or club, are the players that are brave and have had freedom in making decisions. And I think that's all coach driven in terms of creating an implicit learning environment where players have autonomy and are asked to make decisions every single day that they play. So that for me is really, really important. And those are the players that I gravitate towards because so much of the players that succeed here, there's a really strong culture of self-directed learning. And certainly there's going to be support from the coaches and the teachers in our school that we have and all the different staff that we have in our club that we're fortunate to have. But at the end of the day, if the player doesn't want to be the author of his own journey, if you will, it always kind of comes to a halt at some point, I would say.
Yeah, and I think it's such an important part, and it's something that's been heavily emphasized, I think, through lots of our dialogue, and certainly our belief at Beyond Pulse is that Obviously, the game is the players, and the more that we can put them in situations and activities where they're encouraged to problem solve and be independent, ultimately the more able we are as coaches to prepare them for whatever it is that comes next and the demands of the game. So, really, really nice to hear that there's synergy there with your thoughts too. Talk to me a little bit about maybe how a coach could tailor specific demands or instructions to that player who's looking to be a leader. So how big of, you mentioned the psychosocial piece, but the character piece, what are you looking for the players to come in with the ability to do? Because obviously the assumption that we make, with the type of academy that you're involved with, the MLS, the pro programs, I'm assuming that while it is self-directed learning driven, there's also going to be a demand to separate yourself from other very talented young men, and the character or the leadership qualities that they possess. How important is it that players have been exposed to developing those competencies before they come into your environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite important. It also depends on kind of what age the player is. So if it's an under 19 player, certainly our expectations are going to be different if it's an under 13 local player joining. But I think ultimately we do have we have a holistic project that consists of a school across the street, a residency program for those that need, and then obviously the soccer piece. So for us, we're not just thinking about the soccer side of things. We are really, really cognizant of the culture, and we want to add good people to our project. So that's not to say that every kid that we add doesn't have some red flags here or there, but ultimately the decision that we make when we acquire a player is in our environment with the resources that we have. Will they be able to succeed? And some players are going to need more resources than others, but I think if there's a good foundation and a boy is at his core a good kid or comes from a good family, we'll never say no to a player because of that. And again, to your point, it's going to be seamless and a really easy transition, and others it'll be more difficult. But again, I think it goes back to kind of the last question a little bit, is that I think the more the players are exposed to game environments where they have to solve problems on and off the field and come up with solutions, I think those are typically the players that are able to thrive once they're able to go into a higher environment. And I don't think that's just specific, obviously, to the Philadelphia Union.
For sure. And do you think if we were guilty of one thing as coaches sometimes with high performing kids, I would emphasize that maybe we don't stress and challenge them enough in certain instances of the game to both work on their weaknesses and then refine their strengths. Where do you fit, or where do you sit in finding that balance? Is it, I'm going to make a good trait exceptional, or I'm going to build the characteristics and the foundations of a player so that they're, equally proficient across, both feet or in different roles? What do you look for? What is that true identification of special?
Yeah, I think, again, it comes a little bit of age specific, but at the younger ages, certainly we're going to try to create well-rounded players and work on their weaknesses, but also, to your point, try and develop their strengths as well. And I think the older they get, sometimes the more you focus on the strengths. And I think, to be fair, in our country, with the limitations that our club coaches have with the players, it's really, really difficult to be able to have the contact time that you need with the players to work on all the different individual aspects to their game that you need. And that's MLS academies, that's DAs, that's non-DAs, it's everybody across the board. And I think we're fortunate with our project that we're able to train on average 8 times a week. So we are able to work on some of these individual aspects to players' games a little bit more. But I think back to your kind of original question with what we maybe need to do more from a staff perspective, and that's us included, is allowing kids to express themselves on game day. And I think sometimes we can get so caught up in results and winning and losing maybe, where these kids need to find ways to be brave and courageous and think forward. And especially in our style of play where we really value forward thinking instincts and bravery, I think if we're not allowing kids to make mistakes and fail and succeed when they're young, I think that will be detrimental long term. So not an easy question, to be fair, and not an easy solution, but I do think we're making strides in the right direction in our club, but I think across the country as well.
Yeah, great. So go then towards, any of the potential technical directors or DOCs, technical leads in programs that may listen. What is the recommendation for building relationships and for having exit routes from the club program? Because ultimately what we're going to encourage is that the decision that's in the best interest of the player is made, right? That's in an ideological world, that's where clubs operate from, that if they have somebody who demonstrates that they're quote unquote too good for where they currently are, that there's the option of passing forward to hopefully an MLSDA program like yourselves. So talk to me a little bit about what club directors can do to establish those types of relationships, or how they can be visible, how they can establish opportunities for their players to get a look if perhaps they've not yet been on the radar of a club like yourselves.
Yeah, I think, first I would say, I think, sometimes the pro clubs, we can do a better job of, and, I speak for us personally, getting out into the communities and into our market and creating these relationships with academy directors and DOCs and club coaches, and develop our market in a better way. I know that's been a point of emphasis for us at the union for the past few years of trying to bring as many clubs in to see our project. But I think the next step is for us to get out to the clubs in the community and learn from them too. I think the nature of talent identification, but I think the nature of sports in general is collaboration is, I think, for me, so vital. And you're seeing it across the country. More and more clubs are merging and combining resources and bringing players together to create maybe an ideal player pathway in their market. And that's really, I mean, for me personally, that's great to see. But I think I don't want to speak just to like the club directors and the DOCs, because I think that's taking maybe taking the focus off of us at the pro clubs as well. I think it needs to be a two-way street, and I think there needs to be collaboration from both parties to your point, to have families make the best decision for their kids. So I know that we've kind of made really, really good strides in terms of working relationships with the clubs in our community and even in greater distances. But it's not just us trying to teach those staff members and whatnot. It's us genuinely wanting to learn about what a club in New Jersey might be doing, or in Delaware, or in Eastern PA, or in Michigan for that matter. Across the country, I think there's so much that everybody can learn from one another.
Yeah, no, very, very true. If you could put your finger on something that might be missing, you've obviously coached in terms of you've coached against some highly talented programs. You've scouted for, the national team programs are obviously competing against other teams and kids from around the world. If you could wave a magic wand right now to all the coaches and the club directors out there and said, this is something that across the board I see as us lacking, what might it be, and any advice and solutions on how to fix it?
Yeah, it's not an easy question, Tom. But I wouldn't say there's one thing that I wouldn't say there's one thing that I think needs to maybe get better, and it's across the board for every club or every player. I think me personally, and I think our league has made great strides in this regard. We played in the MLSGA Cup this past weekend, and some of the best learning environments for our current player pool is when they're playing against top domestic competition and top international competition. And I think if there was a way to bring clubs together in a better way more often, throughout the year to create a really, really strong competitive platform. I think that would benefit us greatly. And I'm sure it's in the similar kind of situation for non-MLS DAs and non-DAs in general, is how can we find ways to bring some of the elite players together more often at an earlier age. So if that's through different programming or different type of leagues and combining resources, again, the collaboration piece for me is huge. And there's so many different entities in the United States. You have really, really good players with high potential in so many different leagues and tournament play and all of this. So I think if there was a way to kind of bring everybody together, that's what I would love to do. But certainly there's a lot of different barriers and challenges and constraints that go along with that in such a big country.
For sure. I'm going to make this, I think, the last question, unless we spin off of it. But it's kind of the voodoo topic of any of the talent identification piece. In different countries, in different cultures, obviously we've discussed an overemphasis on winning, but how important you want to bring kids together that are, competitively similar. How much is the drive and desire to come out on top that's not necessarily emphasized by the coach, but is more internally driven by the player? How much is that the characteristic of that type of character piece important to you guys?
I think that's really one of the most important pieces. If they're going to excel out of the academy environment into a USL contract or a first team contract, and hopefully from there, beyond into one of the top 5 leagues in the world, which is what we would love as a club. So I think embracing adversity, embracing challenges, and embracing competition is so important. And I think now in this generation of players and how much the game has grown and how much you can watch it, on the week and on the television, I think our generation is getting a little bit more comfortable with that. Our players, and I can speak for the Union Academy players. We're always looking to get better and drive the player pool. And again, it's not going to be easy, and there's going to be ups and downs, and we have to be able to help kids deal with those challenges. But I do think if you look at a characteristic of all the players that have quote unquote made it to a contract in the past 6 to 7 years at the Union, they all had a really, really strong mindset and desire to succeed and to fight and to compete and to battle and to overcome adversity. And I think we can help that again as staff by creating that environment and championing those that are able to fight through and work through those challenges. But to your point and to your question, it's really, really vital for us and something we really value.
Magic. And I think that's a perfect way to end. So, Jon, thank you ever so much for your time and for your insight. It's greatly appreciated, and I'm sure there's so much information just out of this short conversation that people can take. So, thank you for your time, and thank you for the opportunity to chat.
Yeah, no, thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.